The sun hung heavy over the town of Dustvale that morning, a merciless orb in a sky bleached of mercy. Heat rippled off the packed earth, where leather boots stirred up ghosts of dirt, and the air smelled of sweat and something sour like hope left out to spoil. A row of children stood along the splintered auction platform, their shadows knife-thin against the sun-bleached wood. Among them a girl no older than 6 with hair like frayed rope held the hand of a toddler whose bare feet were caked with dust. The little one's dress, once the color of wild roses, had faded to the hue of old bruises. "Mama!" she whimpered, but the word dissolved into the dry air. Only her sister answered, brushing a thumb raw from scrubbing pots across the toddler's tear-streaked face. At the front, the auctioneer, a man with a voice like gravel and a tin cup, cleared his throat. "Next lot, 2 strong backs, no ailments. Can fetch water or chase off coyotes." The crowd murmured a sound like distant thunder. The girls didn't move until a woman in a faded calico dress shoved them forward. "Don't let those big eyes fool ya," she snapped, adjusting her bonnet. "The older one's got a mouth on her, but she'll learn. The little one's quiet as a shadow long as her sister's near." A hulk of a man in a stained butcher's apron stepped up. "I'll take the big 'un," he grunted. "Got a cellar needs scrubbing. Don't need the runt." The older girl's grip on her sister's wrist turned vice-tight. "She stays with me," she said, voice cracking like kindling. The crowd erupted in laughter, all but one. From the edge of the platform, a stranger emerged like a figure stepping out of a heat mirage. His boots were scuffed, his shirt the gray of old ashes. He moved like a man who'd carried more than his share of weight, shoulders squared under some invisible burden. "I'll take 'em both," he said, tossing a coin pouch to the auctioneer. The woman in calico sputtered. "They ain't a matched set." The stranger didn't blink. "They are now." As he led the girls away, the older one glanced back at the butcher, now scowling in the dust. The stranger followed her gaze. "Don't worry," he said, voice low. "Some men measure worth in muscle. Others know it's measured in grit." He tipped his hat to a passing wagon where a weathered woman tossed the girls a bundle of bread wrapped in cloth. The toddler clutched it like a treasure, and for the first time that day, the older girl smiled, a small, fierce thing, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The stranger didn't offer empty promises, just a nod toward the horizon. "We'll see how far those legs can carry you," he said. And with that, they walked away from Dustvale towards something unnamed, but together. The man called Hatch didn't seem like the kind who kept company with ghosts, but the cabin sure did. The older girl, Lena, though she hadn't offered the name yet, eyed the blue woolen coat like it might speak. Hatch followed her gaze, then reached over and unhooked it from the nail. For a heartbeat, his fingers lingered on the fabric, rough as sandpaper against the soft weave. Then he tossed it into a cedar chest at the foot of the bed and shut the lid with a thud that sounded like a full stop. "Beans'll heat up quick," he said, ignoring the unspoken question hanging between them. The toddler Maisy Lena had whispered it earlier, like a secret stirred, but didn't wake her tiny fingers clutching the blanket like it was the only solid thing left in the world. Lena tore off another hunk of bread. "You always this chatty?" she asked, dusting crumbs from her lap. The twist in her voice was new, sharp enough to cut, but edged with something almost playful. Hatch's mouth twitched, not a smile but close. "You always this mouthy," he shot back. The wind chime outside clattered like a drunk's laughter, and for the first time since Dustvale, Lena's shoulders loosened. She leaned back in the chair, studying him. "You ain't a rancher," she declared. "No cattle, no branding iron hung up like a trophy." Hatch stirred the beans. "You a detective now?" "Nope, just real good at spotting liars." She pointed to his hand's knuckles, scarred, one finger bent crooked. "Those ain't from roping steers. That's fist fighting." The spoon stilled in the pot. For a second, the only sound was Maisy's quiet breathing. Then Hatch exhaled long and slow. "Used to be a lawman," he said, "till I figured out most outlaws wear badges." The admission hung in the air like gun smoke. Lena's smirk faded. She glanced at Maisy, then back at him. "So what's your play here? Salvation Project? Guilt?" The beans bubbled. Hatch ladled them into a chip bowl and slid it toward her. "Ate alone too long," he said simply. Outside, the sun dipped below the ridge, painting the scrub grass in golden shadow. Somewhere beyond the canyon, a coyote yipped a sound that should have been lonely, but somehow wasn't. Lena shoveled beans into her mouth too fast, like someone might take them away. Hatch didn't comment, just pushed the salt cellar closer. Then, because the universe has a sense of humor, Maisy sat bolt upright in bed and screamed like a banshee. Not a sleepy whimper, but a full-throated shriek that sent Lena's spoon clattering to the floor. Hatch was across the room in 2 strides. "Mama's gone!" Maisy wailed, eyes wild with night terrors. Lena moved to rise, but Hatch was already there, scooping the child up like she weighed nothing. "I know," he said, gruff but steady, "but the coyotes ain't getting you tonight." He jerked his chin toward the door. "Listen." Silence. Then the wind chime's metallic giggle. A bullfrog's croak from the creek. Proof the world kept turning. Maisy's death grip on his shirt loosened. "You smell like bacon," she mumbled into his collar. Lena burst out laughing, a real startled sound that seemed to surprise even her. Hatch shot her a look that could have curdled milk. "You're hilarious," he deadpanned. And just like that, the cabin didn't feel so empty anymore. Lena watched through the cracked door as Hatch disappeared toward the barn, his silhouette cutting through the morning haze like a knife through smoke. The cornbread sat warm in her hands, butter seeping into the cloth, real butter, not the rancid lard they'd gotten scraps of back in Dustvale. She tore off a piece and held it under Maisy's nose. The little girl's eyes fluttered open, pupils dilating like a startled fawn's. "Smell that," Lena whispered. "Ain't no weevils in this one." Maisy sat up, her curls matted to one side. She didn't speak, but her fingers closed around the offering like it was a holy relic. Crumbs dotted the blanket as she ate, methodical, as if memorizing the taste. Lena dipped the tin cup of milk into the basin to cool it, then pressed it into her sister's hands. "Go slow," she warned. "Your belly's shrunk to the size of a pecan." Outside, an axe split wood with a sound like a gunshot. Maisy startled, milk sloshing. Lena's jaw tightened. "That's just Hatch," she said, forcing her voice lighter. "Chopping kindling, or maybe his own foot, judging by that rhythm." The joke landed flat, but Maisy's shoulders relaxed a fraction. Then, quiet as a shadow, the little girl spoke. "Papa?" The word hung between them, fragile as a soap bubble. Lena froze. For a heartbeat, the cabin walls seemed to lean in, holding their breath. She opened her mouth to correct her, to say, "He ain't nothing to us," but the lie curdled on her tongue. Instead, she ruffled Maisy's hair. "Yeah, well, don't go getting attached. Men like him, they're about as reliable as a 3-legged mule." The door creaked. Hatch stood framed in sunlight, axe slung over his shoulder, sleeves rolled to reveal forearms corded with old violence. He took in the scene, Maisy's crumb-dusted chin, Lena's defensive hunch, and something flickered behind his eyes. Without a word, he set a small wooden horse on the porch step, its mane roughly carved but unmistakably alive with motion. Maisy gasped. "Found it in the hayloft," Hatch muttered, already turning away. "Figured it needed a rider." Lena picked up the toy, running her thumb over the grooves. The craftsmanship was crude but careful, the kind of thing a man might whittle during long nights with nothing but memories for company. She glanced at Hatch's retreating back, then at Maisy's shining eyes, and felt something shift inside her chest, tectonic and terrifying. "All right, outlaw," she called after him, voice dripping with exaggerated suspicion. "What's the catch? We muck out your stables, polish your guns." Hatch didn't turn around. "Catch is you eat the damn cornbread before it gets cold." Maisy giggled, an actual honest-to-God sound, and shoved the rest of her portion into her mouth with both hands. Lena watched as Hatch paused by the fence post, shoulders loosening at the sound. The morning sun caught the silver in his stubble, turning him momentarily into something softer, something almost kind. Then the moment shattered. A rider appeared on the ridge, dust pluming behind him like a warning flag. Hatch's posture snapped taut. Lena didn't need to see his face to know his expression had gone cold as a gun sight. "Well, butter my butt and call me a biscuit," she drawled, sliding between Maisy and the door. "Guess we're about to find out what kind of ghosts haunt a lawman-turned-hermit." The spoon wine chime clattered wildly, as if laughing at the joke no one else found funny. The whittling knife stilled in Hatch's hand as Lena set the box between them like a peace offering or a lit fuse. Moonlight caught the ribbon's edge, turning it into a slash of river blue against the weathered porch boards. Tatter the dog lifted his head, sniffed the air, then flopped back down with a sigh, as if to say, "Humans, always complicating things." Hatch exhaled through his nose. "Figured you'd find that eventually." His voice was gravel wrapped in burlap, rough but not unkind. Lena plopped down beside him, legs dangling off the edge like they had every right to be there. "That her handwriting?" She nudged the letter with her toe. Looks like chicken scratch. No offense. A snort escaped him before he could choke it back. None taken. Sarah couldn't spell cat if you spotted her the C and the T. The words slipped out easy, surprising them both. Lena grinned sharp as a tack. Ha, so she did have a name. She leaned back on her elbows, triumphant. Sarah. Sounds like someone who'd fold her apron real neat. The night air hummed with crickets and something warmer the first thaw between them. Hatch picked up the ribbon, running it through his fingers, like a rosary. She'd have liked you, he muttered. Hellion that you are. Inside, Maisy let out a sleep-muffled cough. Lena's smirk softened. She'd have liked her better. Maisy's the polite one. Polite's overrated. Hatch tucked the ribbon back into the box, but left the lid open this time. Sarah once threw a cast-iron skillet at my head for tracking mud on her floor. Lena barked a laugh loud enough to scare an owl from the cottonwood. Now that's a love story. For a heartbeat, the ghost of a smile flickered across Hatch's face. Then the moment fractured, Maisy's sudden wail sliced through the night like a knife. Both of them were moving before the second sob hit. They found her sitting bolt upright in bed, drenched in sweat, tiny fists clutching the blanket. "The bad man's coming!" she gasped, eyes wild with nightmares. Lena reached for her, but Hatch was faster. He scooped Maisy up, blanket and all, and marched straight out the door. "Come on, Sprout," he grunted. "We're going to count stars till your brain remembers it's safe." Lena trailed after them, arms crossed against the chill. "You know she can't count past 3, right? Then we'll count to 3 real slow." Hatch settled on the porch steps, Maisy curled against his chest like a second heartbeat. He pointed at the sky. "That one's yours, that one's Lena's. And that bright one, that's Sarah's. She's winking at you." Maisy's breathing slowed, her fingers unclenched. 4, she whispered, pointing to a faint star near the horizon. Hatch's throat worked. "Yeah, that's yours too. Claim as many as you want." Lena watched them, something hot and unnameable rising in her chest. She stomped her foot, suddenly sending Tatter scrambling. "Damn it, Hatch. You're ruining my whole men are useless philosophy." He didn't look up, but his shoulders shook just once with silent laughter. Above them, the stars burned on, indifferent to the small, messy lives below. And in the morning, when Lena found the blue ribbon tied around the base of Maisy's braid, she didn't say a word. Just handed Hatch a cup of coffee, black the way he liked it, and stole an extra slice of bacon when he wasn't looking. Some things, after all, didn't need explaining. The gossip in town grew legs and started running faster than a jackrabbit with its tail on fire. By Sunday service, the church ladies had embroidered the whole story into something biblical. Hatch was either a saint saving orphans or a sinner collecting laborers, depending on who you asked. Lena heard the whispers when she went to fetch flour, the way women's voices dropped to hisses when she passed like rattlesnakes, pretending to be polite. She slammed the sack onto the counter hard enough to make the shopkeeper jump. "Y'all act like you've never seen kids before," she announced to the room at large. "What's next gonna clutch your pearls because we breathe too loud?" A woman in a bonnet so stiff it could have stopped a bullet sniffed. "Children ought to speak when spoken to." Lena leaned in sweet as arsenic. "And busybodies ought to mind their own damn business. Funny how life don't work that way." Back at the ranch, she found Hatch teaching Maisy to whittle, or more accurately, letting her gnaw on a stick while he carved a crude bird. "Town's buzzing like a kicked hornet's nest," Lena said, dumping the flour onto the table. "Turns out buying orphans is fascinating entertainment when there ain't no rodeo in town." Hatch didn't look up. "You punch anybody?" "Disappointingly, no." "Good." He handed Maisy a fresh stick. "Easier to ignore fools than bail you out of jail." Lena scowled. "Since when do you care about easy?" That got his attention. His knife stilled. "Since I got 2 kids who need breakfast more'n they need revenge." The words landed like a gut punch. Lena opened her mouth, closed it, then kicked the table leg for good measure. "Well, I need revenge like I need air," she muttered. Hatch stood abruptly, sending wood shavings flying. "Fine." He tossed her the knife handle first. "Then carve your anger into that log instead of my furniture." For a week, the cabin smelled of pine resin and muttered curses as Lena hacked at the wood, her hands growing calloused alongside her heart. What emerged wasn't art, more like a vengeful stick figure with a noose around its neck. She left it on the porch where the church elder would see it next visit. Hatch found her sulking by the creek, later hurling rocks at a cottonwood. "Real subtle," he drawled. Wasn't trying to be. He sat beside her, the creek murmuring secrets between them. "You know what your problem is." Lena braced for a lecture. You're half grizzly, half honeybee, he continued. All sting, no hive. She blinked. That's the dumbest thing I ever heard. Yep, he tossed a flat stone at Skip 5 times. But you're listening? The next Sunday they rode into town together, all three of them. Maisy perched on Hatch's shoulders like a tiny queen, Lena trailing behind with Tatter on a rope leash. The whispers started before they hit the boardwalk. Then, miracle of miracles, Maisy spoke, loud. That lady's hat looks like a dead chicken, she announced, pointing at the pastor's wife. The street froze. Lena choked on spit. Hatch's shoulders shook. And just like that, the spell broke. The hat did look like a dead chicken. People laughed, first nervously, then genuinely. The pastor's wife turned beet red and later donated the hat to the poor box. That night, Lena found Hatch oiling his revolver by lamplight. You planning to shoot the next busybody? She asked. Nope. He spun the cylinder. Just remembering how to protect what's mine. Something warm unfurled in Lena's chest. She pretended not to notice. Under the bed, Maisy's drawing of their odd little family gathered dust. Outside, the stars kept watch. And in town, the gossip shifted because nothing ruins a good scandal like a child's honesty and a man who refuses to flinch. The summons burned a hole in Hatch's pocket for 3 days before he finally saddled up and rode into Marabone alone. The church loomed at the end of Main Street, its whitewashed walls blinding in the midday sun like heaven itself was trying too hard. Pastor Driscoll met him on the steps, Bible clutched to his chest like a shield. We've concerns, Mr. Hatch, he began, voice dripping with syrup-thick pity, about the arrangement with those children. Hatch chewed the inside of his cheek. They got beds, food. Ain't that what your sermons preach? The pastor's smile tightened. Of course, but a man of your history, alone with 2 young girls, people talk. Let 'em. Hatch's thumb hooked in his belt near his revolver, not a threat, just a reminder. Unless the Almighty started taking census notes, I reckon what happens on my land ain't nobody's business. A lace curtain twitch across the street caught his eye. Mrs. Peabody, the town's self-appointed morality meter, watching like a vulture over carrion. Hatch tipped his hat to her with exaggerated courtesy. She vanished like a spooked ghost. Back at the ranch, Lena was teaching Maisy to skip stones by the creek, or rather demonstrating how to hurl them with enough force to scare fish. How'd the holy rollers take it? She called as Hatch dismounted. About as well as a cat in a bath. He tossed her a paper bag of lemon drops from the mercantile. Pastor's got a face like a constipated owl when he's nervous. Lena cackled, nearly dropping her next stone. Should have told him we sacrifice chickens at midnight. Really give him something to pray about. Maisy gasped. We do. No sprout. Hatch sighed, scooping her up. But if Lena keeps scaring the trout, we might need to start. That night, the wind carried the faint echo of the church bell. Not for them, never for them, but for some poor soul getting married or buried. Lena sat on the porch steps, sharpening a stick with Hatch's knife. They gonna try to take us? She asked suddenly, voice flat. Hatch rocked back in his chair. Not while I'm breathing. She tested the point of the stick against her thumb. What if they bring law? Then we'll introduce them to my law. The words hung between them, heavy as a gunslinger's stare. Lena snorted. Damn, Hatch, that's almost romantic. He choked on his coffee. The next morning, Maisy presented Hatch with a gift, a mangled dandelion chain she'd woven herself. For your hat, she declared, standing on tiptoe to crown his battered Stetson. Lena nearly swallowed her tongue, trying not to laugh at the sight of the grizzled ex-lawman, now accessorized like a maypole. Then, because fate has a sense of humor, the church ladies chose that exact moment to come calling. Their wagon creaked up the drive just as Hatch, flower-crowned and wholly unrepentant, was demonstrating how to properly curse at a stubborn fence post. Mrs. Peabody's mouth puckered like she'd bitten a lemon. Mr. Hatch, we've brought scriptures. She held out a pamphlet titled The Godly Home like it was a live grenade. Lena leaned against the porch post, grinning. How neighborly. We was just discussing scripture ourselves. Ain't that right, Hatch? Hatch adjusted his floral headpiece in deadpan. Suffer the little children and all that. Maisy, blissfully oblivious, waved a grubby hand. I mean, ladies. The visit lasted precisely 4 minutes. As the wagon retreated in a cloud of dust, Lena doubled over, laughing. Oh my God, their faces! Hatch plucked a wilted dandelion from his hat. You're a menace. Takes one to know one, papa. She shot back then, froze the word hanging between them like a dare. Hatch went still. The wind chimes sang. Somewhere in the distance, Tatter barked at a ground squirrel. Then, with the gravity of a man signing a treaty, he reached over and ruffled Lena's hair. Damn right. And just like that, the last wall crumbled. The church bell could ring all it wanted. This ranch, these people, they'd built their own kind of sanctuary. The stew simmered too long that night, the way silence does when it's about to break. Lena stirred the pot with enough force to risk cracking the cast iron, her jaw set like flint. Maisy sat at the table, tiny feet swinging oblivious to the storm brewing in her sister's bones. Hatch watched from the doorway, arms crossed. You gonna stir a hole through that pot, or you got words you're chewing on? Lena slammed the spoon down. Why don't you fight them? The question burst out like a cork from a bottle. You stood up to that butcher at the auction, but now you're just taking this. Hatch moved to the hearth, tossing in a log that sent sparks fleeing up the chimney. Fighting ain't always fists and bullets, kid. Sometimes it's outlasting. Maisy piped up around a mouthful of bread. Like when Tatter waits for gophers. Exactly. Hatch ruffled her hair. Except these gophers wear bonnets. Lena wasn't mollified. She yanked the blue ribbon from her braid and slapped it on the table. So what's the plan? Wait till they vote us out like stray cats. Hatch picked up the ribbon, running it through his fingers like he was measuring its worth. Then he did something unexpected. He laughed. A rough, rusty sound that startled them all. Hell, Lena, you really think a bunch of church ladies scarier than you? The absurdity of it hung in the air. Even Tatter lifted his head, one ear cocked. Lena blinked. What? Hatch tied the ribbon around his wrist, the blue stark against his sun-leathered skin. You walked through fire to keep that kid safe. He nodded at Maisy, now giggling at nothing. Ain't no committee gonna undo that. The truth of it settled over Lena like a too-big coat. She deflated, shoulders slumping. Then what do we do? Hatch reached into his vest pocket and tossed something onto the table. A sheriff's badge, tarnished but unmistakable. Turns out being a retired lawman's good for two things, knowing how to bend rules, and knowing which ones deserve bending. Maisy gasped. You're a sheriff. Was. He picked up the badge, polishing it on his sleeve. Till I quit chasing bad guys and became one according to some. Lena's eyes narrowed. You telling me you've had legal pull this whole damn time and didn't use it? Hatch smirked. Where's the fun in that? The next morning they rode into town like a parade nobody asked for. Hatch in his least mended shirt, Lena, with her hair braided tight as a hangman's knot, Maisy perched on the saddle, clutching Tatter like a furry scepter. They stopped right outside the church during Sunday service. Hatch didn't shout. Didn't need to. He just pinned that old badge to his chest and stood there, sunlight glinting off the metal like a challenge. The congregation spilled out whispers rising like a dust devil. Pastor Driscoll paled. Mrs. Gaines's bonnet trembled. Lena, ever helpful, announced loud enough for the back pews. Sheriff says we're official now. Y'all can stop wetting your petticoats. Maisy, misunderstanding entirely, waved cheerfully. We brought cookies. She held up a sack of burnt molasses lumps Lena had baked that morning. It was, Hatch reflected, as the crowd dissolved into chaos, possibly the worst peace offering in history. But when the church ladies hesitantly accepted the cookies and ate them without dying, something shifted. The wind chime back at the ranch sang a little louder that night. The stars burned a little brighter, and under her breath, where no one could hear, Lena finally whispered the words she'd been biting back for weeks. The locket under Lena's pillow didn't work miracles, but it did buy her 7 hours of unbroken sleep, which in their world might as well have been magic. She woke to the smell of burning bacon and Maisy's giggling. Hatch stood at the stove, cursing under his breath as he tried to flip the charred strips with a fork clearly not up to the task. Morning, sleeping beauty. He grunted when Lena shuffled into the kitchen. Figured you'd sleep till Judgment Day. Lena squinted at the blackened mess. Judging by that bacon, it's already here. Maisy, perched on the counter with Tatter's ears in her fists, nodded solemnly. He said it's crispy style. It's ruined is what it is, Hatch muttered, scraping the pan with unnecessary force. Lena plucked a piece from the pile and bit into it with theatrical crunching. Tastes like regret and poor life choices. Hatch's glare could have melted iron. But then, miracle of miracles, the corner of his mouth twitched. You're a pain in my ass, you know that. Lena grinned around another bite. Takes one to know one old man. The moment shattered when a knock rattled the door. 3 sharp raps, official, unfriendly. Hatch's hand went to his hip out of habit, though he hadn't worn his revolver to breakfast. Sheriff Tate stood on the porch, hat in hands, looking like a man who'd rather be anywhere else. Hatch, got word from the county seat. They're sending a social inspector tomorrow. Lena's bacon turned to ash in her mouth. Hatch didn't blink. Let him come. Tate shifted his weight. Look, I know you're square, but these bureaucratic types, they got forms for their forms. Might help if the girls were well. He trailed off, eyeing Lena's bare feet and Maisy's syrup-smeared cheeks. Lena crossed her arms. If we were, what prettier, politer, whiter? The sheriff flushed. I'm just saying. We hear you, Hatch cut in voice colder than a midwinter creek. Now get off my land before I forget we're friends. When the door slammed, the cabin held its breath. Even Tatters stopped panting. Maisy broke the silence first. What's a social buzzard in a waistcoat? Hatch said, tossing the ruined bacon out the window for the crows. Lena wasn't laughing. She stared at the locket now hanging around her neck, the mint long since crumbled to dust. We should run. Hatch turned from the sink, hands dripping. And go where? Anywhere, Mexico, Canada, someplace with fewer damn forms. He dried his hands, slow, deliberate. Or, he said, we stay and fight. Lena snorted. With what, your legendary bacon-burning skills? No. He reached above the mantel and pulled down a leather-bound book, thick, official-looking. With this, Maisy gasped. A Bible? Worse. Hatch cracked it open with a flourish. Property deeds, marriage licenses, even got my great-aunt's recipe for peach cobbler in here somewhere. Lena peered at the pages. How's this help? Hatch tapped a yellow document. Says here Sarah and I legally adopted 2 girls back in '78. Names got smudged in a flood, but the dates line up suspiciously well. A slow, wicked grin spread across his face. Paperwork's a funny thing. Sometimes it adjusts to fit the truth. Lena's jaw dropped. That's illegal. So's selling children, Hatch said mildly. Yet here we are. The fire crackled. Somewhere outside, a crow cackled over its bacon prize. Maisy tugged Hatch's sleeve. Does this mean we get to stay forever? Hatch scooped her up, syrup and all. It means nobody gets to take what's mine. And just like that, the fear unspooling in Lena's chest snapped taut with something else entirely, hope sharp and bright as a new forged blade. That night, she didn't put the locket under her pillow. She hung it on the bedpost where it caught the moonlight, a tiny beacon in the dark. Let the inspectors come. Let the town whisper. They were Hatch's girls now, on paper and truth, in every way that mattered. And heaven help anyone who tried to undo that. The frost clung to the windows like lace, but inside the cabin the air was thick with unspoken dread. Lena traced the fading berry stain on the courage stone, with her thumb, her other hand gripping the locket so tight it left marks on her palm. Across the room, Maisy gnawed at her nails with the intensity of a beaver felling a tree. Hatch watched them from the hearth, his mending forgotten in his lap. The silence stretched until it was near unbearable. Then he stood abruptly, chair scraping like a gunshot. All right, enough. Lena jumped. Enough what? Enough moping. He strode to the door and yanked it open, letting in a blast of frigid air. Bundle up, we're going. Maisy blinked. Where? To make some goddamn noise. 10 minutes later, they stood in the frozen pasture behind the barn, armed with an assortment of pots, pans, and one very confused dog. Hatch handed Lena a rusted washboard and a spoon. Ever heard of a protest? Lena eyed the makeshift instruments. You want us to serenade the county into leaving us alone? Nope. Hatch hefted a cast-iron skillet like a weapon. I want him to hear us coming. And with that, he brought the skillet down on a hanging plow blade with a clang that sent crows scattering for 3 counties. Maisy shrieked with delight and banged 2 pie tins together like cymbals. Tatter howled along, off-key but enthusiastic. Lena, after a moment of stunned silence, joined in with the washboard, her rhythm jagged but fierce. They made a terrible, beautiful racket, the kind that rattled fence posts and shook icicles from the eaves. The kind that couldn't be ignored. When their hands were numb and their breath came in clouds, Hatch called a halt. The sudden quiet rang louder than the noise had. Lena's cheeks were flushed, her braid coming undone. That was actually fun. Damn right. Hatch ruffled Maisy's hair as she giggled uncontrollably. Tomorrow we'll teach you to cuss in 3 languages. But the moment of levity shattered when a figure appeared at the pasture gate, Sheriff Tate, looking like he'd rather be facing down a pack of wolves. Hatch, got word from the county. They're sending the inspector early. Lena's washboard hit the snow with a thud. How early? Hatch asked, voice dangerously calm. Tomorrow noon. The world seemed to tilt. Maisy's small hand found Lena's, her nails bitten to the quick. Then Hatch did something unexpected. He laughed, a deep, rolling sound that startled them all. Perfect. He scooped up the skillet and handed it to Lena. Practice up. Tomorrow we give him a performance. That night, Lena lay awake long after Maisy's breathing evened out. The locket felt heavy around her neck, the mint long gone, but its ghost still lingering. She slipped it off and tiptoed to Hatch's door, where lamplight still spilled beneath the frame. He sat at his desk poring over papers with the intensity that would have set the documents ablaze if looks could spark. Lena cleared her throat. You really think banging pans will help? Hatch didn't look up. Nope, but it'll feel good. She hovered in the doorway, the locket warm in her palm. Here, she thrust it at him. For luck. Hatch turned the tiny metal heart over in his calloused hands. Your mama's only thing I gotta keep. Lena swallowed hard. Figured you should hold on to it tomorrow. Since you're, you know, doing the talking. A muscle jumped in Hatch's jaw. He closed his fingers around the locket and nodded once. Get some sleep, Hellion. Big day tomorrow. As Lena turned to go, he added quietly, whatever happens, you're mine. Paper or no paper. The words settled over her like armor. Outside, the wind howled through the canyon, carrying their defiance all the way to town. Let the inspector come. Let the whole damn world watch. They were ready. The hearth fire crackled as Hatch settled Maisy into bed, her cold fingers still clutching his shirt collar, even in sleep. Lena lingered in the doorway, the blue ribbon from the cedar grove now tied around her wrist like a battle standard. You hungry? Hatch asked, brushing frost from his sleeves. Lena shook her head, then contradicted herself by grabbing a hunk of bread from the table. She chewed mechanically, eyes fixed on the sleeping form of her sister. She really thought she was livestock. The words hung between them sharp as a butcher's blade. Hatch stirred the embers with more force than necessary. People see what they want to see. Yeah, and what do you see? Lena's voice cracked like thin ice. Two strays you took pity on a charity project. Hatch turned so fast the firelight carved shadows into the lines of his face. I see family. The word landed like a thunderclap in the quiet cabin. Blood don't make a damn bit of difference when it comes to that. Lena's bread fell forgotten to the floor. Tatter scarfed it up before either could react. Then, because the universe has a sense of humor, Maisy sat bolt upright in bed and announced sleepily, I'm a person, before flopping back onto the pillow. The tension shattered. Hatch's shoulders shook with silent laughter. Lena pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle a giggle that threatened to turn into a sob. You're a menace is what you are. Hatch told Maisy's sleeping form, his voice rough with affection. He reached into his pocket and pulled out Lena's locket, the chain glinting in the firelight. Figured you'd want this back. Lena took it carefully as if it might dissolve. You didn't need it after all. Didn't say that. Hatch nodded toward the mantel where a framed photograph of Sarah now sat beside Maisy's charcoal drawing of their odd little family. Had my own good luck charm. Lena's breath hitched. She fastened the locket around her neck with trembling fingers, then did something utterly unexpected. She launched herself at Hatch, wrapping her arms around his middle in a hug so fierce it nearly knocked the wind out of him. Hatch stiffened for half a heartbeat before settling a tentative hand on her back. Easy there, Hellion. Ain't gonna disappear. Lena buried her face in his shirt. You better not. Outside, the wind howled through the canyon, carrying with it the first fat flakes of snow. Tomorrow would bring the inspector the hearing, the whole damn town's judgment. But tonight, the cabin held them close. The ex-lawman, the fierce-eyed girl, the child who finally knew she was human, and the dog who loved them all unconditionally. As the fire burned low, Hatch reached over and tugged Lena's braid gently. Get some sleep. Big day tomorrow. Lena smirked, wiping her nose on her sleeve. Yeah, we gonna bang pots at the courthouse. Worse. Hatch's grin was all teeth. We're gonna be respectable. The horror on Lena's face was worth its weight in gold. The pastor's gaze lingered on the popcorn garlands strung haphazardly across the mantel. One section suspiciously denser, where Maisy had clearly eaten more than she threaded. His stern expression softened at the edges. Seems I'm interrupting Christmas preparations? Lena snorted. Try survival preparations. Hatch here thinks cranberries count as vegetables. Winter rations, Hatch corrected, pouring coffee into his least chipped mug and shoving it toward the pastor. Drink up. You look like you wrestled your conscience and lost. The pastor accepted the cup with a wry smile. Not far from the truth. He took a careful sip, then set it down and reached into his coat. I brought you something. The document he unfolded bore the county seal and enough legal jargon to choke a horse. Lena tensed her fingers, curling into fists. But the pastor surprised them all by turning it upside down and pointing to a nearly illegible signature at the bottom. See this Judge Callahan's nephew, fresh out of law school and eager to make his mark. A conspiratorial glint entered his eye. Turns out he finds certain antiquated adoption laws unjust. Hatch's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. You telling me we got a legal loophole wrapped in Christmas ribbon? More like a legal canon. The pastor smoothed the paper with reverence. This declares you their legal guardian pending final approval, which given the judge's newfound enthusiasm for reform, should take about, he pretended to check a pocket watch, 30 years or so. Maisy, who'd been eavesdropping from behind the door, let out a squeal and launched herself at the pastor's knees. Does this mean I get to keep my name? The pastor blinked. I suppose. Good. Maisy nodded solemnly. Because Maisy Hatch sounds like a storybook. Lena's face did something complicated between a sob and a laugh. She turned abruptly to the stove, pretending to adjust the flame. So what's the catch? No catch, the pastor hesitated. Though Mrs. Peabody may insist on monthly virtue inspections, Hatch choked on his coffee. Lena spun around, eyes blazing. Over my dead body. Joe, the pastor continued loudly. I'm sure we can redirect to simple wellness checks involving pie. Lots and lots of pie. A beat of silence. Then Hatch reached over and shook the pastor's hand with enough force to rattle his teeth. You're all right, preacher, for a man of the cloth. As the pastor took his leave, snowflakes catching in his graying hair, Lena stared at the document like it might bite. This real? Hatch scanned the fine print. Real enough to make a bureaucrat weep. Maisy tugged his sleeve. Can we celebrate with pancakes? And just like that, the fragile tension in the cabin shattered like ice on a hot griddle. Lena whooped, tossing a handful of popcorn into the air. Hatch, normally so reserved, swept Maisy into a bear hug that left her giggling uncontrollably. Outside, the snow fell thicker now, blanketing the ranch in quiet forgiveness. The wind chimes sang a jubilant tune, and somewhere in the distance a lone coyote howled, not in hunger, but in something that might have been kinship. That night, as Hatch added a new line to his ledger, stayed even when the law said we could, he didn't notice Lena watching from the hallway. Didn't see the way she touched the locket at her throat, her smile softer than the falling snow. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Mrs. Peabody's pies, the town's whispers, the endless work of building a life from scraps of hope. But for tonight, they were family on paper and spirit in every way that mattered. And no amount of snow or bureaucracy could freeze that truth. The locket lay open in Hatch's palm, its tiny compartment empty now. No dried mint, no ghost of safety past, just a faint herbal scent clinging to the metal. Lena stood beside him, shoulders squared like she was bracing for impact. Mama's gone, she said, voice rough as unplaned wood. But we ain't. Hatch's throat worked. He snapped the locket shut with a click that echoed in the quiet cabin. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than the snow outside. This meant everything to you. Lena shrugged, suddenly fascinated by a loose thread on her sleeve. Means more now. To all of us. Maisy, ever the diplomat, broke the moment by climbing onto Hatch's back like a squirrel. Can we have pancakes to celebrate the judge not being a butthead? Lena choked. Where'd you learn that word? Hatch's mustache twitched. Probably from you, Hellion. Was not. Was too? Maisy crowed, swinging from Hatch's arm. You said it when... A knock at the door cut through the laughter. 3 sharp raps, official impatient. The room froze. Hatch set Maisy down gently. Stay behind me. But when he opened the door, it wasn't the sheriff or some stone-faced bureaucrat. Mrs. Peabody stood on the porch, her infamous bonnet dusted with snow, holding a pie tin, like a peace offering. Behind her, half the town loitered at the gate, the pastor, the storekeeper, even the butcher from the auction, all trying and failing to look casual. Mrs. Peabody thrust the pie at Hatch. Rhubarb, she announced as if confessing to murder. Your daughter mentioned it was your favorite. Lena's jaw dropped. I never, Maisy piped up. I told her when she gave me candy at church. Hatch accepted the pie with the caution of a man handling live dynamite. This a bribe, Peabody? The woman's cheeks flushed. An apology, she muttered, then louder. The board voted, unanimously. The girls stay. A cheer went up from the gate. The butcher actually tipped his hat. Lena looked ready to bolt or punch someone, maybe both. Hatch settled a hand on her shoulder. Breathe, kid. We won. Mrs. Peabody cleared her throat. There is one condition. Of course there was. Hatch's grip tightened. The church Christmas pageant, she continued. We're short a holy family. Silence. Then on who went showing. Absolutely not, Lena hissed. Maisy clapped. I want to be the angel. Hatch pinched the bridge of his nose. Let me get this straight. You want me to play Joseph, and the girls as Mary and the Christ child, Mrs. Peabody said with the air of someone negotiating a hostage situation. It would reassure the community. The absurdity of it hung in the air like tinsel. A former lawman, a foul-mouthed orphan, and a child who thought she was livestock, playing the holiest family in history. Lena's grin turned feral. Only if I get to hold the real baby Jesus. That's a goat, Hatch groaned. Details. Mrs. Peabody looked heavenward for patience. 7 o'clock sharp. Don't be late. As the townfolk dispersed, Hatch stared at the pie like it might explain the universe's sense of humor. Lena collapsed into a chair, cackling. Joseph! Joseph! This I gotta see. Maisy tugged Hatch's sleeve. Do I get a crown? Hatch sighed, the long-suffering sigh of a man who'd faced down outlaws and bureaucrats, only to be bested by a 6-year-old's stage ambitions. He reached for the ledger one last time, adding beneath all the other entries. Somehow became a Christmas miracle. Outside, the snow kept falling gentle and relentless, covering tracks old and new. The wind chime sang a carol. Somewhere in the distance, Tatter barked at nothing and everything. And in a cabin that had once been too quiet, 3 voices argued good-naturedly about angel wings and fake beards, filling the night with the kind of noise that only families make. Hatch closed the locket with a soft click, the fresh mint sprig inside already scenting the air with its sharp, hopeful fragrance. Lena shifted from foot to foot, suddenly awkward now that her grand gesture was done. Figured it needed updating, she muttered. Since we ain't running no more. Maisy, never one for subtlety, barreled into Hatch's legs. Does this mean we're official, like in storybooks? Hatch scooped her up with one arm, the locket still clutched in his other hand. More official than the county paperwork. This here, he tapped the locket against her nose. This is forever kind of proof. Lena rolled her eyes, but the effect was ruined by the way she kept blinking, too fast. Don't get mushy on me now, old man. We still gotta survive the Christmas pageant. As if summoned by the very mention, Tatter came barreling through the door, with something white and lacy clamped in his jaws, what might have once been an angel's wing from the church props. Snowflakes melted on his fur as he pranced around the room, immensely pleased with himself. Hatch groaned. That's the 3rd one this week, Maisy gasped. He's helping the real angels, don't need wings anyway. Lena snatched the mangled prop from the dog's mouth. Pretty sure Mrs. Peabody's gonna have an aneurysm when she sees this. Let her. Hatch set Maisy down and reached for his coat. I got an idea. An hour later, the entire town gathered in the churchyard for what would go down in Marabone history as the most unorthodox nativity pageant ever staged. Hatch stood stiffly in his Joseph robes, holding a staff that looked suspiciously like a repurposed rifle cleaning rod. Lena, draped in blue linen, cradled a squirming goat with a doll's bonnet tied to its head. This is disrespectful, she hissed through clenched teeth as the animal tried to eat her veil. You're the one who insisted on realism, Hatch muttered back. The pièce de résistance Maisy, resplendent in tinsel wings, and Hatch's old sheriff badge pinned to her chest, perched atop a hay bale, with all the gravitas of a tiny glittery archangel. When the pastor asked where her halo was, she beamed and pointed to the badge. I'm the law now. The congregation didn't know whether to pray or applaud. As the final carol ended, something miraculous happened. Mrs. Peabody, infamous bonnet askew, stepped forward and placed a sprig of mint on the makeshift manger. For the Holy Family, she said with a pointed look at Hatch. May their home always be fragrant. It was as close to a blessing as they get. Walking home through the snow, the locket warm against his chest. Hatch realized Lena was right. They didn't have a name for what they'd built yet, but as Maisy chattered about angel duties and Lena argued with the goat still trailing them, one thing was certain. It wasn't just a home. It was a legend in the making. And when the wind chimes sang that night, it didn't whisper. It roared.